Caleb McAllister choked on the acrid stench of disinfectant, his gnarled hands flailing against the starched white sheets. "Easy, Caleb. Easy now." A woman's voice cooed, close to his ear. He saw nothing but swirling gray, the phantom smoke of a battlefield long past. "They're comin', Mary," he rasped, his voice a dry rattle in his chest. "They're comin' for the ridge." "There's no one coming, Caleb. You're safe here at Meadowbrook." It's 1938. The words meant nothing. He was back. Back in the Virginia dust, the screams of dying boys echoing in his ears. He smelled the gunpowder, the rot, the fear. He saw the butternut uniforms, the rebel yell, the glint of steel in the morning sun. "Damn you, Yankee," he roared, his frail body surging with a strength he hadn't possessed in decades. His hands, withered and spotted with age, locked onto something soft and yielding. A strangled gasp filled the air. The swirling gray sharpened into a single horrifying image. A face, contorted in pain and surprise, blurring above him. "Caleb!" "Stop!" a new voice boomed. A strong hand gripped his shoulder, pulling him back. The pressure around his fingers lessened. He blinked, and the battlefield faded. He was back in the sterile room, the smell of disinfectant stinging his nostrils. Standing over him was a young man in a white coat, his face etched with concern. The woman, the one who had spoken to him so gently, lay slumped against the bedrail, her face turning an alarming shade of purple. What happened?" Caleb whispered, his voice trembling. The young doctor, whose name tag read Dr. Albright, stared at him, his jaw tight. "You tell me, Mr. McAllister. You tell me what just happened here. I don't know," Caleb stammered, his gaze fixed on the nurse. Her chest barely moved. He felt a cold dread creep into his bones, heavier than any winter wind he'd faced at Gettysburg. It just came over me. The smoke. The faces. Dr. Albright's face remained impassive, but his eyes narrowed. "You were choking her, Mr. McAllister. She's unconscious." He barked orders at another nurse who had rushed into the room. "Get the crash cart, now!" The room erupted into controlled chaos. Nurses moved with practiced efficiency, attaching monitors and preparing an oxygen mask. Caleb remained frozen, a statue of guilt and terror. He watched, helpless, as they worked to revive the woman he had harmed. "He's been having nightmares," a shaky voice offered. It was Margaret, the kind-faced volunteer who often read to him. She stood in the doorway, her eyes wide with fear. "Terrible ones. He talks in his sleep. About battles." Dr. Albright spared her a fleeting glance. "He nearly killed her, Margaret. Nightmares are one thing. This is assault." He turned back to Caleb, his voice hardening. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" Caleb swallowed, his throat dry. I didn't mean to. It was like I was back there. He was coming at me with a bayonet. I had to." He trailed off, unable to articulate the visceral horror that still clung to him. The nurse gasped, a rattling sound that cut through the tension. One of the other nurses adjusted the oxygen mask, and color slowly returned to her face. "She's breathing," someone announced, relief evident in their voice. Dr. Albright let out a slow breath he hadn't realized he was holding. He gestured for the other nurses to continue monitoring her, then turned his attention back to Caleb, his expression grim. "Mr. McAllister," he said, his voice low and deliberate. "I understand you're an old man, and you've been through a lot, but what happened here is unacceptable. I'm going to have to report this. Report me?" Caleb croaked, his heart sinking. "To who? What will they do to me?" The thought of prison after all he'd endured was unbearable. "I don't know," Dr. Albright admitted, his voice softening slightly, "but I can't ignore this. She could have died. We'll need to determine your mental state. We have to ensure this doesn't happen again." He paused, considering. "I'm going to order a psychiatric evaluation. And until then, you'll be under constant supervision. No more being left alone." Caleb felt a wave of despair wash over him. He was trapped. Trapped in his own mind, trapped in this place, and now, trapped under the watchful eyes of strangers who saw him as a danger. "Please," he pleaded, his voice barely a whisper. "Don't lock me up. I didn't mean to hurt her. It was the war. It's always the war." Dr. Albright looked at him, a flicker of something that might have been pity in his eyes. But his face remained firm. "I'm sorry, Mr. McAllister. My priority is the safety of my patients and staff. We'll do everything we can to help you, but we have to follow protocol. Margaret stepped forward, her voice trembling slightly. "Doctor, please. He's not a violent man. He's just reliving the past. Can't you see that?" "I do see that, Margaret," Dr. Albright replied, his voice weary. "But seeing it doesn't change what happened. And it doesn't guarantee it won't happen again. I'll speak to the psychiatrist myself, explain the situation. But my hands are tied," he turned to one of the nurses. "Arrange for Mr. McAllister to be moved to a room closer to the nurses' station, and ensure he has a sitter at all times." As the nurses began to move him, Caleb looked back at the unconscious woman, her face pale beneath the oxygen mask. Guilt gnawed at him, sharper than any physical pain. He had spent his life trying to forget the war, but the war had not forgotten him. And now it had brought him to this, a prisoner in his own mind and a danger to those around him. He was no longer Caleb McAllister, the farmer's son, the soldier, the survivor. He was just a monster in the eyes of those who looked at him. The weight of it threatened to crush him. As the nurses wheeled him away, Caleb caught Margaret's eye. He saw a mixture of fear and pity there, and something else, a lingering thread of affection. He wanted to tell her he was sorry, to explain, but the words caught in his throat, choked by shame. His new room was small and sterile, the white walls offering no comfort. A young man, barely more than a boy, sat in a chair beside the bed. He introduced himself as David, his assigned sitter. David looked nervous, his gaze darting around the room, avoiding Caleb's eyes. He probably thought he was babysitting a ticking time bomb, Caleb thought bitterly. "You don't have to be afraid of me, son," Caleb rasped, his voice hoarse. David jumped, startled. "I'm not afraid, Mr. McAllister," he stammered, though his wide eyes told a different story. "Just making sure you're comfortable." "Comfortable?" Caleb scoffed, a dry, humorless sound. "Comfort died a long time ago, son. Back in '63, near Gettysburg. Froze to death beside a creek." David didn't reply, just shifted uncomfortably in his chair. The silence stretched, heavy and thick with unspoken anxieties. Caleb closed his eyes, willing himself back to the present, away from the ghosts that clawed at the edges of his mind. But they were relentless, those specters of the past. They whispered of smoke and blood, of screaming horses and dying men. Hours crawled by. Caleb feigned sleep, listening to David's shallow breaths, the distant hum of the hospital. He knew he couldn't stay here. Not like this. He was a danger to himself and to others. He had to find a way out, a way to escape the prison of his own mind. Later that evening, Dr. Albright visited him again, this time accompanied by a woman with kind eyes and a soothing voice. "Mr. McAllister," she said gently, "I'm Dr. Eleanor Hayes. I'm a psychiatrist, and I'm here to help you." Caleb looked at her, skepticism etched on his face. "Help me? Nobody can help me. I'm a broken man, doctor, a danger to everyone around me." "We can try," Dr. Hayes insisted, her voice calm and reassuring. "Tell me about what happened earlier." "Tell me about the war," Caleb hesitated. The war was a wound he had kept carefully concealed for decades, a festering secret that threatened to poison everything he touched. But he knew deep down that he couldn't keep running from it forever. He started slowly, haltingly, describing the horrors he had witnessed, the friends he had lost, the things he had done. He spoke of the relentless heat, the gnawing hunger, the constant fear. He spoke of the Battle of Antietam, the bloodiest day in American history, where he had seen more death than any man should ever have to see. As he spoke, the memories became more vivid, more real. He could smell the gunpowder, feel the earth tremble beneath his feet, hear the screams of the wounded. The room seemed to shrink, the walls closing in around him. "And then," he whispered, his voice trembling, "there was Gettysburg." He described the charge across the open field, the hail of bullets that tore through the ranks, the bodies falling like wheat before a scythe. He described the hand-to-hand combat, the brutal, savage struggle for survival. "I saw a man," he said, his eyes glazed over with the memory. "A Confederate soldier. He was trying to bayonet me. I fought him off. I killed him." He paused, his breath coming in ragged gasps. "But sometimes," he continued, "sometimes I still see his face. And sometimes I think he's still coming for me." Dr. Hayes listened patiently, her expression never changing. When Caleb had finished, she remained silent for a moment, allowing him to gather himself. "Mr. McAllister," she said finally, What you're experiencing is called post-traumatic stress disorder. It's a common condition among veterans, especially those who have seen combat. It's not your fault. And it can be treated? Treated? Caleb scoffed. You think you can just erase the past, Doctor? You think you can just make it all go away? No, Dr. Hayes replied. I don't think I can erase the past. But I do think I can help you learn to cope with it. I can help you find a way to live with the memories without letting them control you. She explained that she wanted to start him on medication to help calm his anxiety and reduce the frequency of his flashbacks. She also suggested therapy, where he could talk about his experiences in a safe and supportive environment. Caleb listened, but he remained unconvinced. He had lived with the war for so long, it had become a part of him. He couldn't imagine life without it. I don't know, Doctor, he said finally. I don't know if I can do this. You can, Dr. Hayes insisted. You've already survived so much. You're stronger than you think. As Dr. Hayes left, Caleb looked at David, who was still sitting quietly in the corner. She thinks she can fix me, he said, a hint of bitterness in his voice. David shrugged. Maybe she can, Mr. McAllister. Maybe it's worth a try. Caleb didn't reply. He knew that David was just trying to be kind, but he couldn't shake the feeling that he was beyond help. He was a relic of a bygone era, a living ghost haunting the present. And he was starting to believe that the only way to find peace was to join the other ghosts in the past. The seeds of a plan began to form in his mind, a desperate attempt to regain control, to escape the prison that was slowly suffocating him. He needed to get out of this hospital. He needed to find a place where he could be alone with his memories, where he could confront his demons once and for all. And he knew just the place to go. His old farm. It had been abandoned years ago, but it was still there, a silent witness to his past. And it was the only place he felt he could truly be free. The farm, Caleb muttered, more to himself than David. They haven't burned it down yet, have they? David frowned. The McAllister place? Last I heard it was just empty, overgrown. Why? Caleb ignored the question. He was already picturing it. The dilapidated barn, the sagging porch, the fields now choked with weeds. It was a graveyard of memories, both good and unspeakable. But it was his graveyard. I need to go there, he said, his voice gaining strength. I need to see it again. David stood up, concern etched on his face. Mr. McAllister, you're not well. You can't just leave. The doctor can't understand, Caleb snapped, his eyes flashing. She sees me as a patient, a broken toy to be fixed. She doesn't see the war. She doesn't smell the smoke, hear the screams. He trailed off, his gaze drifting back to some unseen horror. I just want to help, David said softly, stepping closer. But you need to let me. Let the doctor. Caleb looked at David, his face softening slightly. He saw the genuine concern in the young man's eyes, the desire to alleviate his suffering. But it was a chasm too wide to bridge. You can't, he said, his voice now weary. No one can. He spent the rest of the afternoon mostly silent, lost in thought. David tried to engage him in conversation, but Caleb remained distant, his mind clearly elsewhere. As dusk settled, painting the sky in hues of gray and purple, Caleb began to stir. Help me, he said, his voice barely a whisper. David rushed to his side. What is it, Mr. McAllister? Are you in pain? I need my coat, Caleb rasped. And my boots, David hesitated. But where are you going? Just help me, Caleb insisted, his grip tightening on David's arm. Reluctantly, David retrieved Caleb's worn wool coat and heavy leather boots from the closet. He helped the old man dress, noticing how frail he had become. His hands trembled as he laced up the boots, the leather stiff and unforgiving. Thank you, Caleb said, his voice slightly stronger. Now help me to the door. David guided Caleb down the hallway, past the nurse's station. A young nurse, her name tag reading Sarah, looked up from her paperwork. Mr. McAllister? Where are you going? She asked, concern evident in her voice. Just for a walk, Caleb replied, his voice surprisingly firm. Need some fresh air, Sarah frowned. But Dr. Hayes didn't authorize. I'll be back soon, Caleb interrupted, his eyes hardening. Just need a little air. He continued towards the exit, David trailing behind him, a mixture of apprehension and guilt churning in his stomach. He knew he shouldn't be helping Caleb leave, but he couldn't bring himself to stop him. There was a desperation in the old man's eyes that he couldn't ignore. Outside, the night air was crisp and cold. Caleb inhaled deeply, the scent of wood smoke and damp earth filling his lungs. It was a familiar smell, a smell that transported him back to his youth, to a time before the war had shattered his world. "I need to get to the farm," he said, his voice barely audible above the rustling of the leaves. David looked at him, his face etched with worry. "Mr. McAllister, it's too far. You're not strong enough." "I have to," Caleb insisted, his eyes fixed on the distant horizon. "It's the only place I can find peace." He started walking, his gait slow and unsteady. David stayed by his side, offering support. They walked in silence, the only sound the crunch of their boots on the gravel path. As they walked, Caleb began to mutter to himself, his words fragmented and incoherent. Gettysburg, Devil's Den, the wheat field. David recognized the names of famous Civil War battlefields. He realized that Caleb was reliving his past, trapped in the horrors of his memories. "It's okay, Mr. McAllister," he said softly. "You're safe now. You're not there anymore." Caleb didn't seem to hear him. He continued to mutter, his voice growing louder, more agitated. "They're coming. The Rebs. They're everywhere." Suddenly, he stopped walking, his body rigid. He stared into the darkness, his eyes wide with terror. "They're going to flank us," he shouted, his voice cracking. "We have to hold the line!" He grabbed David's arm, his grip surprisingly strong. "Get down!" he yelled. "Take cover!" David tried to pull away, but Caleb held him fast. He could feel the old man's fear, his desperation. "Mr. McAllister, it's just me, David," he said, trying to calm him down. "There's no one here," but Caleb didn't recognize him. He was no longer in the present. He was back on the battlefield, fighting for his life. "We have to stop them," he screamed. "For the Union!" He released David's arm and charged forward, his body shaking with rage. He ran towards the darkness, towards the ghosts of his past. David watched him go, his heart pounding in his chest. He knew that he had to stop him, but he didn't know how. He was afraid of what Caleb might do, to himself or to others. Back inside the hospital, Sarah, the nurse, noticed that Caleb and David had been gone for quite some time. Growing increasingly concerned, she alerted Dr. Hayes. "He said he was just going for a walk, doctor," Sarah explained, her voice filled with worry. "But they've been gone for almost an hour." "And he seemed agitated." Dr. Hayes' face paled. "Agitated? Did he say anything about the war?" "He mentioned needing fresh air," Sarah replied. "But he also kept saying he'd be back soon." Dr. Hayes didn't believe it. She knew that Caleb was in a fragile state of mind, and that being outside the controlled environment of the hospital could be dangerous. "We need to find him," she said, her voice urgent. "Now!" She grabbed her coat and rushed out of the hospital, Sarah close behind her. They started searching the grounds, their eyes scanning the darkness. Meanwhile, Caleb continued his frantic journey towards the farm. He stumbled through the fields, his body aching with exhaustion, but he pressed on, driven by a force he couldn't control. He had to get there. He had to face his demons. As he approached the farm, the dilapidated buildings loomed in the darkness, their silhouettes stark against the night sky. He stopped at the gate, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He looked at the house, its windows dark and empty. It was a tomb, a monument to a life that had been lost. He pushed open the gate and walked towards the house, his boots crunching on the overgrown gravel path. He reached the porch and stood there for a moment, his eyes scanning the scene. It was just as he remembered it, only more decayed, more desolate. He reached for the door, his hand trembling. He pushed it open and stepped inside. The air was thick with dust and the smell of decay. He could feel the weight of the past pressing down on him, suffocating him. He walked through the house, his footsteps echoing in the silence. He visited each room, reliving the memories that haunted him. The parlor where he had courted his wife, the kitchen where they had shared their meals, the bedroom where their children had been born. Each room was a reminder of what he had lost, of the life that the war had stolen from him. He felt a surge of anger, a burning rage that threatened to consume him. He stumbled into what used to be his bedroom. Moonlight streamed through the broken window, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. He sank to his knees, his body racked with sobs. "Why?" he cried out, his voice filled with despair. "Why did it have to be this way?" He was alone, lost in the darkness of his memories. He closed his eyes and let the past wash over him, engulfing him in its pain and sorrow. He was no longer Caleb McAllister, the old man in the hospital. He was a soldier again, fighting for his life on the bloody battlefields of the Civil War. And in that moment, the line between reality and illusion blurred, and the horrors of the past became terrifyingly real. He was no longer safe. He was back in the war. His breath hitched, ragged and shallow. The moonlight transformed the familiar room into a ghastly parody of a battlefield. Shadows danced like specters, mimicking the swirling smoke of cannon fire. He could smell it, the acrid stench of gunpowder, the metallic tang of blood, the cloying sweetness of decay. A high-pitched whine pierced the silence, morphing into the desperate screams of wounded men. "Medic, medic, please!" Caleb scrambled back, his spine pressed against the cold wall. His fingers fumbled for his rifle, the phantom weight familiar in his trembling hands. Where was it? Had he dropped it? Damn, damn, damn! A figure emerged from the swirling darkness. Not a specter, not a memory. A woman, her white uniform glowing faintly in the moonlight. A nurse. But in Caleb's fractured mind, she was something else. A sneering face wreathed in a gray uniform. "A Reb! A traitor! You bastard!" Caleb growled, his voice a rusty rasp. "Get away from me!" The nurse, startled by his outburst, took a tentative step forward. "Mr. McAllister, are you all right? You're having a nightmare." Nightmare? This was no nightmare. This was real. This was the fight for his life, for the Union. He wouldn't let them win. "Not again! Stay back!" he warned, his eyes wild and unfocused. "I ain't afraid of you, Reb." She reached out a hand, her voice soft and soothing. "It's all right, Mr. McAllister. I'm here to help you." Help? They never offered help. Only death and destruction. He remembered the taunts, the jeers, the gloating faces of the enemy. They thought they had won. They thought they had broken him. He lunged, fueled by years of suppressed rage and the adrenaline of a long-ago battlefield. His hands, gnarled and aged, reached for her throat. The nurse gasped, her eyes widening in terror. She struggled against his grip, her nails scratching at his skin. "Confederate scum!" Caleb roared, his voice a guttural snarl. "I'll send you back to hell!" He squeezed, his fingers tightening around her windpipe. The nurse's struggles grew weaker, her face turning a ghastly shade of blue. He saw it all with crystal clarity. The fear in her eyes, the desperate clawing at his hands, the gurgling sounds escaping her lips. It was just like... The image shifted, blurring the lines between past and present. He wasn't in his bedroom anymore. He was in a muddy trench, the air thick with smoke and the screams of dying men. He was strangling a young Confederate soldier, his face contorted in a mask of terror. The boy's eyes, wide and pleading, mirrored his own fear, and then a flicker of recognition, a name whispered on the wind. Thomas. His grip loosened, his fingers trembling. The nurse slumped to the floor, gasping for air. Caleb stared at her, his eyes widening in horror. What had he done? "No," he whispered, his voice filled with anguish. "No, no, no!" He stumbled back, his hands shaking violently. The battlefield dissolved, replaced by the cold reality of his room. The moonlight streamed through the window, illuminating the woman lying on the floor. He had almost killed her. The horror of his actions washed over him, crushing him beneath its weight. He was a monster, a danger to himself and others. He sank to his knees, his body racked with sobs. "What have I done?" he cried out, his voice filled with despair. "What have I become?" The roar of cannons deafened him. The acrid smell of gunpowder choked his lungs. Caleb gasped, scrambling back against the cold stone wall of what he now perceived as a trench. He saw figures moving through the smoke, their faces grim and determined. Blue uniforms. Yankees. A figure loomed over him, a young man with a clean-shaven face and wide, frightened eyes. He reached out a hand. "Easy, soldier. You're all right." Caleb saw only the blue. He saw only the enemy. The years melted away, replaced by the primal instinct to survive. He roared, a sound ripped from the depths of his soul, and lunged. His hands found a throat soft and yielding. He squeezed, fueled by decades of suppressed rage and terror. The young man's eyes widened in disbelief, then terror. He clawed at Caleb's hands, a desperate, futile struggle. "Rebel scum!" Caleb screamed, his voice hoarse. "You'll not take our land!" You'll not take our freedom. The young man's struggles weakened. His face turned a ghastly shade of blue. Then a voice cut through the fog of war in Caleb's mind. Mr. McAllister. Caleb, stop! You're hurting her! It was a familiar voice, a voice of reason, of compassion. Dr. Anya Sharma. Caleb blinked. The battlefield shimmered, then dissolved. He was back in the sterile hospital room, the moonlight casting long shadows on the floor. He was kneeling, his hands clamped around the neck of a young woman in a nurse's uniform. Her face was contorted in terror, her eyes bulging. He released her instantly, his hands trembling. He recoiled as if burned. No, no. The nurse gasped for air, clutching her throat. Anya rushed to her side, checking her pulse, her eyes filled with a mixture of concern and horror. I didn't, Caleb stammered, his voice choked with shame. I thought she was... Anya helped the nurse to her feet, her voice firm but gentle. She's going to be all right, just shaken. She turned to Caleb, her expression unreadable. What happened, Caleb? He looked down at his hands, the hands that had once held a rifle, the hands that had now nearly taken a life. I was back there, on the field. I saw the blue uniforms. He couldn't meet her eyes. The nurse, her voice hoarse, whispered, he was calling me a rebel. Anya nodded, understanding dawning in her eyes. He was having a flashback, a very severe one. She turned back to Caleb, her voice softer now. Caleb, you need help, real help. This can't keep happening. He looked up at her, his eyes filled with despair. What help is there for a ghost doctor? The war ended a lifetime ago, but it never ends for me. It can, Anya said, her voice filled with conviction. It will. We can find a way to help you process these memories to find peace. But you have to want it. You have to be willing to fight for it, just like you fought on those battlefields. He looked at the young nurse who was now being comforted by another staff member. He saw the fear in her eyes, the pain he had caused. He saw the reflection of his own demons in her frightened gaze. For the first time in decades, Caleb saw a flicker of hope. Not the grand, idealistic hope of victory or freedom, but a small, fragile hope for peace. A hope for a future where he could finally lay down his arms. He looked back at Anya, his voice barely a whisper. I want to try. The following months were the hardest of Caleb's life. He faced his demons head-on with Anya's unwavering support. He relived the horrors of the war in therapy, recounting every battle, every loss, every moment of fear and despair. He learned coping mechanisms, techniques to ground himself in the present when the past threatened to overwhelm him. There were setbacks. Nights filled with nightmares, days plagued by flashbacks, moments when he wanted to give up, to retreat back into the darkness. But Anya wouldn't let him. She reminded him of the progress he had made, of the strength he possessed. Slowly, gradually, the fog began to lift. The memories didn't disappear, but they lost their power. He learned to control them, to compartmentalize them, to keep them from controlling him. One day, months after the incident with the nurse, Caleb found himself standing in the hospital garden. The sun was warm on his face, a gentle breeze rustling through the leaves of the trees. He closed his eyes and breathed deeply, savoring the peace and tranquility of the moment. He opened his eyes and saw the young nurse, Sarah, walking towards him. He tensed, bracing himself for her reaction. She stopped a few feet away, her expression hesitant. Mr. McAllister? Sarah, he said, his voice low. I wanted to apologize. For what happened? I know words can't undo what I did, but I am truly sorry. Sarah looked at him, her eyes searching his face. Dr. Sharma told me about your... flashbacks. About the war. It's no excuse, Caleb said, shaking his head. But it's the truth. Sarah took a deep breath. I understand. And I forgive you, Mr. McAllister. She offered him a small, tentative smile. We all have our battles to fight. Caleb returned her smile, a genuine smile that reached his eyes. Thank you, Sarah. That means more than you know. Years passed. Caleb remained in the hospital, but he was no longer a prisoner of his past. He became a mentor to other veterans, sharing his experiences, offering hope and encouragement. He found solace in reading, in gardening, in the simple pleasures of life. He never forgot the war, but it no longer defined him. He had found a way to live with his memories, to honor the fallen without being consumed by their ghosts. He had finally found peace. One evening, as the sun began to set, Caleb sat on his porch, watching the fireflies dance in the twilight. He closed his eyes, listening to the crickets chirping in the distance. He felt a sense of contentment he had never thought possible. He opened his eyes and looked up at the sky, a vast expanse of stars twinkling in the darkness. He saw not the smoke and fire of battle, but the gentle light of hope. He was no longer Caleb McAllister, the soldier lost in the past. He was Caleb McAllister, the survivor, the peacemaker, the old man who had finally come home. The past was a scar, faded but present, a reminder of the battles fought and the victories won. He was still standing, still breathing, still alive. And as he sat there, bathed in the soft glow of the fireflies, a single tear trickled down his weathered cheek. It was not a tear of sorrow, but a tear of gratitude, a tear of peace, a tear for a war finally, truly, over.